And then kind of the next step of our game plan, so to speak, we have, supporting drainage and detox pathways. So then we actually kind of start opening up the can of worms, like kind of like when y'all open the wall, you're like, oh, here we are. We just kind of figured out exactly like what the extent of the issue is. And that can feel really overwhelming for people too. So this is where I spend a lot of my time and focus in explaining to people kind of how this works with the layers of, okay, we're exposed to spores in the air. The spores can colonize in the body. We also have mycotoxin burden or overload in the body. So we have to kind of start with the ways our body naturally gets rid of toxins already. Like, bodies are pretty cool. Thank you, Lord. Mm-hmm. But we have all these steps of ways our body knows how to get rid of stuff. So we have in our breath, we get rid of a lot of toxins. Our kidneys, our liver, all those things, right? So this all starts with supporting what's called the lymphatic system, which is like our second circulatory system. It's the highway in our body that transports lymph fluid, and that moves bacteria and viruses and toxins. So if you've ever had a swollen lymph node from having a cold or an ear infection, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But lymph...
That can be scary the first time, by the way.
I know, you're like, am I okay?
First time you feel that swelling in your neck. The first time it ever happened to me was last year, and it freaked me out.
Yeah. Well, I had a colleague when we worked in mold, she had swollen lymph nodes for years and could not figure out why her lymph nodes were swollen. And then we moved out of that office, our office did. And her lymph nodes went completely back to normal. So it goes to show you how important it is for mold. And lymph, our heart is pumping our blood. Our lymph doesn't have a pump. So we need to move. It needs a gentle encouragement to move. So we need to do things like walking and stretching and all that stuff to make sure that the lymph is actually moving, especially if you have swollen lymph nodes or congestion, things like that are showing that that's not working well for you. And then
little trampoline. I heard little
trampolines are great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. And then I went down this, sorry, I always sidetrack here, but during Christmas, I was shopping for one of those little rebounder things. And then every ad I saw or Instagram thing, it was like, yeah, the lymphatic system, it's great. Jumping is good for the lymphatic system. I was like, oh,
hey,
okay, cool.
They're not wrong.
I like jumping.
I know. Rebounders, people that use like vibration plates, like really old school, like power plate kind of vibes from the gym. People stand on it. That really helps with lymph as well. So lymph is huge. Just say it. Dry brushing. That's a little more crunchy granola. I can say that because I do it.
What is that?
It's basically you have like a loofah kind of thing, but it's on a brush and you brush like towards your heart area of your heart and it moves the lymph. It has to be done dry. Otherwise you'll like scratch the heck out of your skin, but it works really well.
Why have I never heard of that before?
Probably because it's a little crunchy granola. Probably.
Okay. I'm interested.
And then the next three, I say they're the 3 Ps. I'm like, okay, so pee, poop, and perspiration. Because they all need to be working in their normal order. Because those are like daily maintenance ways of getting rid of detox. And then once all those ducks are in a row, then we can actually add in mold-specific support. I'm sure your listeners have heard about binders, things like glutathione, calcium D-glucarate. Those are the ways that I kind of support people specifically with mold. But the other stuff is, again, a prerequisite to actually being ready to detox in a way that's not going to make you feel worse. It's a process. It just takes some time to get there.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the drainage and detox pathways because something I've been thinking about a lot lately, actually, just given we're out in moldy environments all the time. And I will admit, back in the day, I did not protect myself like I should, didn't wear PPE like I should, didn't wear long sleeves, hats, masks like I should. Used to wear this little N95, which is like the minimum requirement for us in Florida, but now it's just respirators or I will feel like absolute garbage in a moldy environment. But the other day, of course, we never know what's in a home till after we get the testing back. Have no idea, but
well, I mean, I'm sure sometimes you have a bad feeling, like when you're doing the testing.
The bad
you're
gut
like,
feeling.
This is not good.
The extent, have no idea.
Right.
The other day, I'm thinking to myself, I really do not want to go to the gym after this, but I just felt like this inner voice was like, you need to go sweat.
Right.
And I know that's one of the ways that helps me feel better. I mean, it took me a while to figure that out, but drinking a lot of water and sweating, it makes me feel a lot better throughout the week because I know from experience when I wasn't doing that, felt like complete garbage. So something that's been on my mind a lot lately.
No, that makes total sense. It does. I'm surprised it took you. I mean, because how long have you been doing this overall? How long have you been?
Almost 11 years now.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
So you were saying you didn't really feel it at the beginning as much. Like you weren't, maybe you just weren't aware of the effects, or maybe it just hadn't caught up with you yet. Do you know why?
Well, the great awakening for me was when we finally went to a shoemaker conference. I think that was 2016, maybe. Actually, that's when we first went to that conference. Not that long afterwards is when we met Taylor for the first time. And she was like our first, I don't want to say case study, but our first real client that their doctor was positive that her environment was making her sick. So it was right around that time when I started thinking to myself, I have to make a conscious effort to do better about detoxing.
Right. And again, you just don't know until you know. And so many of us are like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have, grown up or stayed in this environment for like 12 years or whatever it might be. Right.
Yeah.
I have so many clients tell me horror stories. They're like, oh yeah, no, like my bedroom growing up, the ceiling would cave in from the water coming in. I'm like, oh yeah, probably a mold issue. Right. But it's good to know what we can do to prevent and to keep yourself healthy so you can keep doing this work for as long as possible. And just be healthy for your family and all that good stuff. But yeah, like sweating is huge. Like saunas are great if people can tolerate them. A lot of the really sick mold people can't even get there with sauna, but you don't need a sauna if you live in Florida. Just go outside unless it's January. Right now it's a little cold.
Let's go sit in your car. No, windows up and
no AC.
No. Actually, don't do that. Please don't take
no. And you can have the help of people to understand what detoxing is and so forth, but you're not going to know what works for you. What works for me might not work for you, Carly. It might not work for Adam. But I know what makes me feel better. I know what I can do to make sure I feel like I'm detoxing properly.
Right. Agreed. Everybody's different. And we all have different thresholds of what we tolerate too. Like for me, what I could tolerate in terms of I could stay in a moldy hotel for one night, but if I had to stay there for 2 or whatever, right, I know that I'm not going to feel good. And so everybody's a little bit different in terms of their window of tolerance. And that changes. As I've healed and gotten better, I have way more tolerance for it, which is great because I would prefer to not live my life in a bubble. I'd prefer to be able to move forward pretty empowered. And so that's the big thing I recommend people is create your plan and then stick with that. Be confident in it. Don't let people, put their little opinions in there is that really going to work or this and that? Create your plan, stick to it. Because you'll see the fruit of those, the fruit of all the hard work that you put in as long as you're consistent with it.
Carly, question. You often hear, and I remember my grandmother, she'd be sensitive to everything, perfumes and any odor. And I hear people all the time say, as I've gotten older, I become sensitive to this, to this, to this, to this. Is that a load? Are you just, you get to the point where in mold being one of those things that you're being exposed to where you just can't handle it anymore?
It's the mast cells. So it's that mast cell activation component. It could even be slightly genetic, like you said, because you feel worse when you're in an environment with a lot of heavy growth that's active. And that's a lot of mycotoxins. So it could have been mycotoxin exposure that kind of filled up her toxic bucket, so to speak. And that can create a sensitivity to perfumes and foods and chemicals and all kinds of stuff. Clearly, a lot of chemicals aren't really good for us anyway. But inability to tolerate them completely, that's another story, right? So that kind of comes back to sensitivity from those detox pathways being clogged and mycotoxin load being high. Yeah.
I think it'd be fair to say most people have, mold exposures that they're not aware of and grew up with, even in this current environment, especially in this current environment where everything is air conditioned,
right?
And every environment is synthetically cooled, and every building is built cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and lighter with worse and worse materials. So, yeah, it's I was an insurance adjuster. I didn't wear any kind of PPE for anything. There was no mold industry.
You made it, Adam. You're still living.
I was, in the worst places possible. Off air, off the show, I'll share one of my craziest ones. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I had some wild buildings I walked into. But yeah, definitely had exposures for sure.
Yeah. So that last point Carly made, I believe, is creating your own kind of personalized mold protocol. right?
Yep.
That was the last point you just made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
It's something that trips people up. Like, you got to keep your eye on your own body and not be looking at what everyone else is doing to get results, because I've had people that said they needed to take prescriptions for their mold, and other people that did it all with supplements, or other people that just healed completely naturally, or whatever it is, right? It looks different for every person. That's the big takeaway there. Yeah.
You see that a lot with people on the forums, on the online forums, for sure.
Well, we'll make sure to provide that link for your mold course in the description. I think you also provided a freebie resource for our listeners too. So make sure to check that out, and we'll share that on social media as well. But can you give us a little information about your podcast, kind of your goal with the podcast, and what people may be able to learn from that?
Absolutely. So, and again, the mold is part of my story, but it's not all of it, right? Like, every one of us is a multifaceted individual. I'm not saying that I just fixed this mold thing and it, like, healed my life or anything like that. It's a big pillar, and that's why I'm so passionate about it, why I created the mold masterclass. Again, so I teach you how to create your own personalized mold protocol in that class. So that's always an option for anybody that wants to learn specifically about mold. But the podcast, the heart of the podcast, is to talk about all the different facets and aspects of health from lots of different people, whether they're people that have gone through their own healing journey. I do my own solo episodes with more of like the science and like the nerdy stuff about a specific topic. Our latest one was about exercise specifically, and like what are the science-backed benefits of it. But the heart of the whole podcast is how to stay focused on healing and to maintain hope in your healing process, no matter what that looks like, no matter how long it takes, to trust your body and to know that you're being taken care of in that way. As long as you are putting one foot in front of the other and being consistent with your actions, that you're going to be able to see the fruit of all the hard work that you're putting in. That journey just looks different for everyone. So to be an encouragement and to share some education and practicals about that. So the podcast is called the Carly Bayless Podcast. I was very embarrassed that I had to name it my actual name. I tried every other variation and they were all taken. So I said, okay, Lord, this is my sign to just make it my name. Easy to find, but it's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And then in the copy, Sean and Adam will link, there's a freebie that is my mold resource guide. So it shares quick links to all the recommendations that I briefly touched on today. So everything from my course to cleaning product recommendations to things that help your body heal. So everything all in one place with clickable links as well.
Carly, you do in-person and virtual treatment? Or
right now, just virtual.
Just virtual?
Yep. I mostly work with people all over the country and several outside of the country as well. So it just made it easiest for everybody. But yeah, virtual right now.
Yeah, we'll definitely link the podcast here. I think it's an important resource. We're excited to be affiliated with you for at least a little while and see what
Carly,
good things happen.
What were the other names you were trying to go with for your podcast?
My brand is called Wholehearted, but every podcast on earth is called Wholehearted.
Okay.
I tried everything, and if you look it up on Spotify, it's like 1,000 different podcasts. I was like, we're just going to call it Carly Bayless Podcast because nobody's going to steal my name. So
no.
That works well. But yeah, my website is carlybayless.com. And if you /podcast, you can get to the website with the podcast episodes and the clickable links as well. But anywhere podcasts are found. Yes.
Perfect. I'm looking forward to checking it out and hopping on with you at some point, hopefully too.
Awesome. That would be so great. I would love that. Thank you both.
You got it. Thanks again for hopping on with us, Carly.
Of course. You're so welcome, you guys. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. See you on the next one.
The content in this podcast should not be taken as medical advice. While our goal is to educate, the hosts are not medical professionals, and the opinions expressed are their own. For any health concerns or questions about mold exposure and its effects, please seek the advice of a qualified healthcare provider.